Can I say that hasn't already been said about the murderous, perfidious, barbaric actions of the Soviet Union? Except I told you so. Except I'm surprised that you're surprised. I'm shocked that you're shocked. What did you expect the Soviet Union to do? Did you really think they had changed? We in the West constantly are victimized by our own idealism. Constantly are done in by our own wishful thinking. But the fact of the matter is, this is not apocalypse. This is really nothing new. A more dramatic, a more tragic episode, yes. And I don't wish to sound cynical because when it comes to the loss of life, I'm not. But the fact that 269 innocent people were shot down out of the skies means nothing to those beasts in the Kremlin. And if there was anybody that needed an education on what the Soviet mentality is like, they got it. What I dread, though, is that in the course of time, this will have been forgotten, and the same apologists and the same pinkos and the same lefties and the same misguided nihilistic misfits who get too much publicity in this country will again be talking about how inflexible the president is, how we really don't understand that we don't have the sophistication to cope with the complexities of a modern world. And probably next year in the campaign, the 6 pretenders will be talking as though this never happened. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see. Closer to home, from our How Does This Grab You file, a judge has dismissed charges. Now listen to this closely. A judge has dismissed charges against a Brooklyn man accused of raping 4 women and attempting to rape a 5th because, he says, the Brooklyn district attorney failed to prepare the case during the required 6 months. A spokesman for District Attorney Elizabeth Holtzman said the decision would be appealed. Acting judge, he's an acting judge, Albert Tomei of State Supreme Court in Brooklyn ruled that the 6-month requirement could not be waived because the prosecution's delay could not be attributed to exceptional circumstances. So here you have the case of a guy who is serving time, by the way, for a different rape, but the charges against him on 4 rapes and an attempted rape have to be dropped because the judge says the district attorney didn't take action against him in the required time. In other words, another guy will be walking the streets because of a technicality, a guy that they know to be guilty. Incredible. How long? Oh, how long do we continue this insanity? To be talking about life in the Soviet Union. What propitious timing that we would have Lev Kopelev as a guest on WMCA. The timing in view of the fact that this is called, the title of this book is translated from the original, from the Russian to the English, Ease My Sorrows, a memoir by Lev Kopelev. We've never met, but are you the author, sir? You are the writer of the book?
Yes.
And, Madame, you are?
My name is Raisa Orlova.
Kopelev too.
And you translated the book to English?
No, I wrote another one.
You?
Shall I begin, yes?
Yes.
Well, I was born in Kiev, in the Ukraine, 1912. I learned there, then in Kharkov, and I came to Moscow 35 as a student for linguistics, Germanistic, and philosophy. 41, after a postgraduate promotion in Moscow Institute of Philosophy and Literature, I went to the front as volunteer, and I was 4 years officer of the Red Army, as it was called at that time.
Yes?
The task of propaganda German soldiers.
A propaganda job.
Yes, propaganda Germans, psychological war, as it's called in the West. 45, before the V-Day, I was arrested and accused of propaganding bourgeois humanism and, how to say it, mercy to the enemy.
You were arrested by your own government?
Yes, by the military KGB, what is now called KGB. Then it has another name.
The same organization that shortly after that was led for 15 years by Yuri Andropov.
Yes. The same organization.
All right, so you were arrested. You were accused of fostering bourgeois propaganda.
Humanism, bourgeois humanism.
Bourgeois humanism. Were you guilty of being concerned with human beings?
Yes.
Yes, that was it.
Were you shocked when you were arrested? Were you surprised, even though Stalin had thrown a lot of people into jail?
Yes, I was shocked, because at that time I was a true believer, and they couldn't imagine that is a crime to be a humanist to his enemies. You
were a Bolshevik, and you.
So I thought there.
You thought at that time, and you felt loyal.
Yes, but in spite of all my feelings, I stayed in prisons and camps more than 9.5 years.
Was the prison, or were you sent to different prisons?
Different prisons and different camps. For the last time in Moscow, in this special prison, which is described in this book.
It's described in the book, Ease My Sorrows. Yes?
Ease My Sorrows, so was called the church. And this church was made to a prison, a special prison. That is the name of the Church of the Icon.
Why, how did you ever get out? You were in prison a total of how many years?
9 years and 7 months.
How did you get out? Did they just one day decide to release you? Was this after Stalin died?
It was after Stalin died. I finished my term because after Stalin's death, we began to receive for good working, was how to say it, 1 day of good work was as 2 or 3 days of sentence. The last year I worked as a translator of technical literature, English, German, French, from another language. And when I fulfilled my plans, so 1 day was counted as 2 or 3 days. So I came a little earlier, but I was rehabilitated only 56.
In 1956?
Yes, after the Khrushchev party.
Stalin had died March 5th, 1953, I believe.
But I stayed in the prison.
So 3 years after his death. I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Harrison Salisbury who said that in his experience, the most important event as a reporter, as an American reporter, was the death of Stalin. Did the death of Stalin really make that much of a difference in your lives?
You see, the day of Stalin's death, I was afraid that it will be worse.
That it would be worse?
Surely, because at that time I have my illusions about Stalin himself. I thought, I described this everything
in the book, yes.
How came this process of disillusion. At this March day, I feared that it will be worse because I knew already the people who judged me and who watched me, the people of the KGB and of the, how to say it,
You're doing very well. If you've just joined us on WMCA, ladies and gentlemen, Lev Kopelev, his wife Raisa Orlova is also with us.
And the psychological war is the best weapon, the truth. Because, you see, when I came short characterize what was Stalinism, Stalinism was sinless terror and shameless lies.
Yes.
Now what changed? Now the terror is no more so sinless than Stalin lies. It is rather with some common sense, bestial, hard but common sense. But shameless lies, the same as in Stalin times. So the best weapon is truth.
Truth.
But if you know, but that is psychological weapon. But if you want to have a vulnerable weapon which can, how to say it,
Right.
which can strike
Influence.
the state, which can influence the state, not only the simple. It would be if the businessman is a man of industry or finances,
Right.
take part in sanctions.
Big
You
money.
know, big money and big industry. What I read now in the paper, the plans of the pilots of International Pilot Organization to boycott, that can be a very good weapon. That can be felt. Because you see, I know a little the people who is now ruling the Soviet Union. Not much, but a little I know them. I know their psychology. They don't estimate the politicians in the West because they think, the politician changed. Yesterday was Carter, now is Reagan, tomorrow will come some other. But the big business, the big industry, they are solid. From the news. We were asking about Vysotsky. Vysotsky is Russia, and Gromyko is the representative of a government of a system which repressed Russia as it repressed Afghanistan, it is repressed Poland.
Did you ever know Yuri Andropov?
No.
No, you never knew him.
Good thing.
He laughed at that one. Okay. How is it that the Russian people, whether they be the Russians of Minsk or Moscow, or whether they be the Ukrainians of Kiev, regardless of why do they not try to, have they ever tried to overthrow this yoke that they've had since 1917? You laugh.
Yeah. Can you imagine what it means, a state with million soldiers, with
Well, would the
tanks
soldiers
and
shoot
fire?
their own people?
What can make a man with only his naked hands?
Would the soldiers shoot their own people?
Surely they would, because soldiers are soldiers. So was it 61 in Novocherkassk. So was it in Jeskazgan, when there were strikes. They were depressed with tanks. It is impossible with modern weapons, with a totalitarian state. It is absolutely impossible.
When I was in the Soviet Union,
To organize is impossible.
all I saw were lines and lines and lines. People wait for a loaf of bread. People wait to buy a dried up vegetable. Lines. Nobody complained. Nobody said anything.
Everybody complained. Everybody complains.
But they were complaining under their breath.
But complaining and organizing to resist such a tyrannical and such weapon might is impossible.
I want to pick up on a point that you made recently, that you shouldn't confuse the Russian people and the Russian government. I would like to get off the subject of Poland, about which I know probably a little more than your guest there, and I want to get back to what we know about Russia and the United States. I don't want you to confuse the actions of our government entirely with the American opinion either. Seems to me that many Americans must be asking, we don't know what actually occurred. I don't know if we'll ever find out. It may take
You want to know something, pal?
May I speak?
Maybe you and Randall Forsberg are the only two Americans asking we don't know what happened.
No, let me say this, if I may. I called in to express my opinion. I will listen to yours afterwards, all right?
No, not all right. I have nothing to say to you beyond that, but I wanted you to know I wanted you to know that you're not going to misrepresent the American people on this radio program.
For the American people. Can we, is it not for us to understand, to find out if we can, what that plane was doing there?
It was on its way from Anchorage, Alaska to Seoul, Korea.
2.5 hours. It was way off.
It is an idiot.
What's that, Mr. Kopelev? What's that?
It is an idiotical question.
Of course. Did you hear that? He said it's an idiotic question.
He said it was an idiotic question?
Absolutely. It certainly was. But you see, this is what frightens me. You're inspired by the Polish people. People like him, I wish they would go to the Soviet Union. The United Nations General Assembly has begun its 38th annual session, but Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko isn't there. He decided to stay away after New York and New Jersey blocked his entry into New York area commercial airports. He had to drop dead, he oughta. Here's another guy had to drop dead. Soviet leader Yuri Andropov has asked the West Germans to reject deployment of new U.S. nuclear missiles set for later this year. But the Germans responded by asking the Soviets to come up with new proposals at the Geneva arms talks. Also, they were reminded that the Pershings are to be put in Western Europe in response to the emplacement of all those SS-20 missiles by the Soviet Union. A weather update.
Ever made any statement regarding the Korean plane incident?
Has who? Andropov?
Yes.
He has said zilch.
That's it. He didn't comment. I will value your reaction to a far-out theory that I have. Long before Andropov became head of state in Russia, there was a clique there that were out to get him. They just couldn't believe that they Jew. And few people know that Andropov is a Jew.
And that includes me. Okay.
It'll all come out in time. I think that this...
All right, you want to tell us how you know what the rest of us don't know?
No, may I just finish the one thing?
No. I want you know, when a person says it'll all come out in time, and this is on a public radio program, I have to say, it's my duty to say, what's your source?
Source of very good information. And that's as far as I can go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a lady expose herself as coming on with a lot of hot air.
Okay, dear.
All right, now that we've disposed of the fiction, let's turn to fact.
Okay, let it be hot air for the moment. This clique was out to get him. They never wanted him to become head of state. Now, I am not pro-Andropov and I'm not pro-communist, God knows. But I think this man had no knowledge of what was happening on this Korean incident. They want to make...
He may not have had any knowledge, but that doesn't mean that there was a conspiracy afoot to discredit him.
I think so. That's what I said. It's a far-out theory.
Well, listen, when we open the telephone lines, we're letting everybody call in, and that's what this program is about.
Fine.
And we don't say that you have to have all the marbles.
Right.
That every marble has to be in place.
Yes, sir-ree. Mine are in place. Very much in place.
All right. You take care of your laryngitis, and we'll wait and see if what you know that the rest of us don't know all comes out. We'll wait. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
At WMCA, it takes all kinds. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, the Westchester County line now. Hello.
Hi, welcome back, Bob. It's so nice to hear you back.
Is this Elaine?
Oh, yes, this is Elaine.
All right, Elaine. What would you like to say from the John Birch Society pamphlet this week?
I'm not a member of the John Birch Society.
Ah, but you should be. You'd made a good one.
What?
Go ahead, Elaine.
Read their literature. I read all literature.
Oh, good, Elaine.
But the one thing, that woman mentioned something about Andropov. My husband brought home an English newspaper that was left on his yacht, and...
That was left on his yacht?
Oh, yes.
Somebody happened to be walking past his yacht, and they just dropped an English newspaper.
Show up at Newport, Rhode Island. Maybe you were there, too.
No. I have no interest in the America's Cup. I'll be glad when it's over so that we can stop hearing people act like they get excited over it. Yeah, go ahead, please.
But the headline of that newspaper mentioned that he was framed, but I tried to find... I looked for the masthead, and I can't find who the publisher is, but it comes out of England, this newspaper.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. On WMCA, Elaine's husband has a yacht at Newport, and somebody happened to drop an English newspaper on the yacht, and it said Andropov framed, probably framed by Paul Needle-Nose Manaj. Hello.
Hello, Bob. This is Tony. Somebody dropped something on my rowboat.
Hey, Tony, listen, I tell you, we've had wall-to-wall wackosville. Can you clear the air, please?
Well, I don't know. I'll try. But listen, don't you think...
You know, anybody's entitled to have a theory on this, and since you've asked me,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, my theory is that it was not premeditated in terms of being a setup. I think it happened spontaneously. I think they did know what they were doing. I think they did feel that they could do it with impunity. And guess what?
What?
They were right.
They did it with impunity.
Of course they did it with impunity.
Yeah.
Okay, how does this grab you file? Come on, how does this grab you file? Did you know, you and I, we go to the store, we have to pay, well, what they call full price. But for some stupid reason, ever since the end of World War II, Soviet officials in Frankfurt and in Berlin are able to go to American PXs and buy the finest merchandise available at cut-rate prices. They can go to the PX, they can go to the commissary and buy all kinds of goodies at cut-rate prices. And a member of Congress said, how long is this idiocy going to continue? And I ask, how long is this idiocy going to continue? The forefront of the auto industry.
Not only that, Bob, but, it's,
reliability, pal. But you know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. It's, for the most part, it's those bums on the assembly line.
That's right. The carelessness.
Yeah.
Carelessness and lack of dedication to the job. The product is good, the material is good.
And they're overpaid. They're overpaid, those bums.
Well, the unions knock the hell out of it.
That's right.
My name is Joe.
Yeah, Joe.
Regarding the Watt comments, I was wondering, you might have read Pat Buchanan's column today in the Post. Watt was not ridiculing anyone, not blacks, not women, not Jews, not the handicapped. He was mocking affirmative action, the quota mindset, that article of liberal faith, much in need of parody and ridicule, when a president of the U.S., Jimmy Carter, can in all seriousness commend his cabinet to fire, quote, all those who are incompetent except minorities and women. And then he goes on to say how there are certain people you can make jokes about and then certain people you cannot make jokes about.
Well, look, I think Pat Buchanan is one of the two or three most salient observers of the American scene in America, and tells it like it is more often than even the sanctimonious George Will, who has become a bit holier than thou. But the fact of the matter is, I don't agree with Pat Buchanan when he comes to the defense of James Watt, because there is no defense for James Watt.
It windmills takes a lot of energy, and it's very frustrating. I drive into Manhattan each day down the Deegan. I see filth and burnt-out cars, and I see garbage and litter everywhere. And I'm appalled, and I just can't get used to it. I can't accept it. It's euphemistically called the quality of life, and I just feel I'm being ground down by it.
Well, of course, you're talking about an area that has been taken over by the brigands, the Visigoths, well, you remember the original word for what we call these acts of desecration and destruction. You remember what those people were called, don't you?
No.
Begins with a V. Vandals.
We've come to...
It is dehumanizing, and...
It's so hard not to despair.
Well, I understand.
We're already cooking, Bob.
Hey, Billy, you must be feeling pretty good. You got three skippers. You got Altabelli. You got La Russa, and you got La Sorda.
That's right. 3 Goombata.
Billy, I know that isn't why you called, though.
No, I called and commented this Berkowitz situation. You know, I was, at that particular time, a couple of years ago, when this guy was going around doing his dirty work, the scurriers that he is, you know, there was guys out here in Brooklyn where I lived that were actually looking for this guy.
Yeah.
I'm just sorry, Bob, that I never got a hold of him.
I am, too. I'm sorry you never got a hold of him, too, Billy.
Because he would have got such an abaliada from me. I tell you, it's a disgrace what this guy's done.
Mazzada, huh?
That's right, a good mazzada. Let me tell you something. Not only that, I'm a stand-up guy, and it's
thought, Billy, by this time in the Slammer, at one of those guys in there with Fatanaboga Matsada, you know, I thought he'd get it inside there.
Well, you know what happened so far? Somebody tried to cut his throat once.
Yeah.
And now I understand not only recently, somebody else went after him with a meat cleave.
They got to get him sooner or later. They got to get him.
They're going to get him, and they're going to get that other guy from South Jersey, the guy that was...
Begenwald?
Yeah, Giorgiani.
Oh, Giorgiani. No, well, but the other guy that I want to see him get is that Begenwald.
Oh, that guy. He's a stupid ass.
Yeah, listen, Billy.
What?
I'll keep in mind what you say. At Chicago, tiene tutte cose.
That's it. Chicago, tutte cose.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about what the Russians have done in Afghanistan, which got a little publicity in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
It seems they dropped toys on crowded Afghan cities. And one kid picked up what he thought was a green little bird, but it was a Soviet booby-trapped toy. Tore off both his arms. Another one got a butterfly, looked like a butterfly, and he lost his right foot.
Yeah.
And this guy in commenting said he's a little sorry he was American because all the Afghanistans were asking for his arms, and they're not getting. As a French retired general said last week, you cannot negotiate arms with these people. They ever negotiate or ask for permission to put in the SS-20s? Do they ever negotiate the invasion of Afghanistan? Of course not. They negotiate what you're going to do. They never negotiate what they're going to do. So when people like that imbecile Anthony Lewis says, my God, if we put in cruise missiles, if we put in the Pershings, what the Russians might do is they might deploy missiles in East Germany. They might move nuclear-armed submarines closer to the American East Coast. I mean, they do whatever they want, and we're supposed to negotiate on what we're doing. And the only negotiations we have now is with ourselves. Reagan makes a proposal. The liberals and the people in Europe scream, not so good. He makes another proposal. We're negotiating with ourselves. What are we worried about what they're going to do? Let's do what we necessarily have to do, and that won't even be enough. And to me, it's absolutely...
Yeah. Unfortunately, there aren't enough of you in this country, but I thank you for the call. Up before 7. And I was about to say what's on your mind, but I don't know. I say that, and people just look and they say, why should I call? I'll let the other guy call. And 186,000 listeners, according to the last time we looked. I have to tell you, that was 1976. Anyway, they say, let the other guy call. Do words frighten you? Well, elitist isn't all that big a word, is it? An elitist is one who thinks that he was put here on this earth to be a privileged person. And usually there's an adjective that goes with the word elitist. It may seem to be a redundancy, that means to be repetitious, but arrogant elitist is the phrase. Arrogant elitist. And do you know, the arrogant elitists are those punks, those spoiled brat punks that don't really know anything about life and don't really know what it's like not to live in America and don't really appreciate this great heritage we have, who go to Harvard and go to Brandeis and go to other snob institutions and don't really believe in freedom of speech. On many campuses, they wouldn't even let Jeane Kirkpatrick appear on campus, our great ambassador to the United Nations, because they didn't like the policy that she was espousing. And throughout the 60s and throughout the 70s, anybody that didn't walk lockstep in with the liberal, radical, lunatic view was hooted and howled and sniped at. The only way Gordon Liddy could get on campus was by appearing with Tim Leary. But I say this without fear that someone will claim I'm prejudiced. I say it has been the left that has been intolerant of expressing views in the public marketplace. It has been the ultra-liberals who have been afraid of a viewpoint divergent from theirs. It has been the spoiled, self-indulged, elitist, arrogant snobs who have not been willing to entertain a viewpoint that doesn't conform to what they think theirs is. And why am I saying all this? Because I was very proud of the fact that an organization which is, yes, to the right of me, nevertheless, this organization greeted Senator Ted Kennedy politely, at times even with warm applause, and they extended to him the courtesy of listening to him speak at the Moral Majority Liberty Baptist Center. Thousands on this, for all the faults that right-wingers may have, they will listen to other opinions. No matter what they may say after, they will listen. But you snobs who go to the Browns and go to the Boston colleges and Boston universities and Harvards, and yes, even Yale, and other such institutions, you think you're too good to listen to another point of view, huh?
Yeah, you're talking yesterday about elitists. The elitists are strange people. They are simultaneously elitists and egalitarians. Now, that's an oxymoronic statement.
Yeah, but they're egalitarians in theory. You know, the elitist liberals love humanity but hate people.
No, but they are egalitarians with everybody else.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, okay, they're not egalitarians when it comes to them. They went down with Falwell. Falwell, they tried to shout him down at Harvard, and Teddy did say to him, at least here you let me speak. Up at Harvard, they tried to stop Falwell from speaking.
Right. You weren't listening to me yesterday. I made quite a point of that.
By the way, I would like to make a pitch for white voter registration. Now, I wonder if that's going to be called a racist request, because we have Jesse Jackson going around the country calling for black voter registration. Now, therefore, I am calling for white voter registration.
Well, I'm sorry to have to tell you, sir, but you haven't looked up the double standard ruling.
Oh, really?
No, I'm sorry, but we have a double standard, sir. Anybody can have a single standard. We have a double standard. If you're calling for white voter registration, you are...
I'm a racist.
You are a racist. If you call for black anything, you're just, I don't know what you are.
By the way, talking about...
A reverend. A reverend.
Oh, that's what it is. A reverend, yeah.
I mean, they call this guy Reverend Herbert Daughtry.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about his background?
Not really. I know who he is, but I know nothing.
Where did he serve? Was it Rahway?
What?
Yes, it was. It was Rahway.
But the interesting, of course, if you're a reverend on the right side of the politics, you shouldn't be involved. If you're a reverend on the left side, that's good. But we're not going to go. We're not going to talk about that.
I leave you with two dirty words.
Yes.
Robert Drynan.
I saw him last night on TV.
Wasn't he disgusting?
Yes. I happen to be...
Can you imagine? All the time he kept quoting the National Council of Churches. Can you imagine?
He should have also thrown in the World Council of Churches and then the Kremlin, the Politburo. We'd have them all.
Right. Listen, you're on the same wavelength as me. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
I think have we gone too far now with this special interest politicking? I was embarrassed. I really was. To see John Glenn, George McGovern, Alan Cranston, Gary Hart. Of the 7 presidential candidates, all but Reuben Askew went to the National Organization of Women to be glowered on, to be squinted at. A very imperious, very arrogant look in the eye of the president, Judy Goldsmith. And they had these men who aspired to the highest office in the land, and they treated them like little boys asking mommy for permission to go out and play. Now, I want to tell you something. I didn't see a feminine woman in the joint. Oh, I'm sure there were some. Maybe the cameras just didn't want to focus on them. I saw feminists, but not feminine feminists, if you know what I mean. I don't know who to blame. I guess everybody's at fault. The candidates themselves for being so hungry, so ambitious. Some might even say craven. And then, of course, these women who have suddenly been looked upon as great power brokers. That they say, you want to be president, huh? Well, pass this litmus test. Everybody's getting a litmus test.
In the interest of fairness, okay, you were discussing the Democrats who appeared at the Women's Convention. But don't you think that Mr. Reagan has been, even though he's not a declared candidate at the moment, has been doing the same thing?
Well, I was talking about a particular event that occurred with the National Organization of Women.
Yeah, I understand.
I was talking about that event, so there was no need for me to bend over backward and worry about, well, let's see, in all fairness. I was talking about that event.
No,
But politicians on both sides of the aisle, in my opinion, are guilty of the same thing. But does it make you feel better, Helen? Yes.
No, I don't mean...
I didn't like the fact that he went chase. You know what he said a couple of, months ago now, I guess, when he said about we men would be, in loincloths and whatnot if it weren't for the women. It's true. I don't know one guy, outside of the Fagelas I know, I don't know one guy that would buy a nice piece of furniture if it weren't for what's her name. It is the women that have a more civilizing effect on men. What was wrong with the president in saying that?
I personally, and I'm in favor of the women's groups, happen to agree with you completely. I personally saw nothing terribly offensive.
And yet he went yapping at their heels to try to apologize. He had nothing to apologize for.
And certainly, even Arthur Avenue in 187.
Oh, you're on Arthur Avenue. Hey, is Nick still taking bets?
I didn't comment on that.
Gabe's Candy Store, Gabe is a bonanima. You remember Gabe?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, he was a fun guy. Still can't believe he's gone.
And how's the Goombata doing?
Oh, Goombata's doing all right. Nicole will let him on now. He's no longer persona non grata. New Jersey authorities are searching for 38-year-old Raymond Leroy Hunt, a convicted murderer serving a 40 to 49-year sentence who escaped from Norway State Prison while a trash pickup detail outside the prison walls. Hunt was the fourth minimum security inmate, get a load of that, minimum security inmate to escape this year. The total of those arrested at the Seneca Army Depot in upstate Romulus, New York, has risen to over 300. The anti-nuclear protesters tried to blockade the entrance to the depot, but when that failed, they scaled a 6-foot fence protesting deployment to Europe of cruise and Pershing 2 missiles and were arrested. Idiots. Well, you see, there are forces in the... You've opened up a larger question here. Mm-hmm. And there are forces in the United States headed by sanctimonious weasels like, I don't feel like writing him a letter, so I won't mention his name. But you know who the sanctimonious weasels are. I'm going to think of their names. Some of them write for the New York Times. I'm going to think of their names in the next 5 seconds, but I'm not going to say their names. But pick up my thought waves. Sanctimonious weasel-like. Mm-hmm. And I thought 3 of them. Now watch our legal department try to figure out who to send a letter to. Anyway, Woody, by the way, Woody, I should have hung up on you. Mm-hmm. Because my super's name is Woody, and he's the worst skunk that ever lived. The only guy who's a bigger skunk than my super, Woody, is his boss, who's my landlord. Anyway, let's get back to something else. Where were we? Oh, yes.
You see, because when you speak of retaliation, how much retaliating can you do?
No, there are people who, they're afraid that the no-good Sandinistas will be toppled. They're so worried. Mm-hmm. You have guys like Teddy Weiss, for example, who just come to mind because he's spoken out on this issue. Mm-hmm. They're more worried about preserving the Sandinista regime than anything else.
Than anything.
It's incredible. Mm-hmm. Appreciate your call, Woody.
Okay, fellow.
Is the director of the Center for International Security, the former Mid-East analyst, United States Air Force Intelligence, Dr. Joseph Churba, who...
That once the Israeli forces withdrew, the security umbrella for the multinational forces was withdrawn, and the multinational forces were then further exposed to hostile fire. And I would recall that the Saudis reportedly spent $4 billion to buy the ceasefire from the Syrians.
the administration believed that it would hold. But none of the ceasefires in the past, nor the present one, is held. And these are realities that are continuously ignored by the administration policymakers. Well, as Secretary of Defense, he is responsible for devising what we call a coherent strategic policy for the United States in that region, and he's failed to do so. Nobody is going to change the balance of forces on the ground with 1,300 men. That is what, in fact, was done. And you might say this was not Secretary Weinberger's decision, this was the President's decision, and he may be right. But still, the Secretary has a definite pro-Arab orientation, which means pro-Saudi, pro-Syrian. He should have understood more than anyone else the importance of keeping Israeli forces as the security umbrella for the multinational forces. More than anyone else, he should have understood this reality. But yet I note, even today, despite this tragedy, American wounded are not taken to the Israeli hospitals, just 10, 15 minutes away. They're transported across to Europe, to West Germany.
Yeah,
So Secretary Weinberger's belief that it is important not to convey any impression to the Arab world that the Americans are cooperating with the Israelis. That was the same reason why the American forces did not cooperate with the Israeli forces when they were along the Damascus-Beirut highway, forcing the Israelis to withdraw unilaterally.
The Israelis did not wish to continue that far north.
Precisely because of the absence of any genuine strategic cooperation with the United States, they saw for themselves no unilateral strategic role here on behalf of the West. I think they're right. They spent a year holding this position, thinking that the U.S. would come and cooperate with them in a practical way to restore the unity of Lebanon. But instead, the United States was more interested in their withdrawal, having forced or induced Israeli withdrawal, creating a vacuum. We refused to fill that vacuum with the forces necessary to retain a certain balance of forces that would require this political solution.
They keep me very busy here. I guess the theory is if I'm so busy interviewing everybody, then that leaves me less time to get everybody in trouble with the comments that I would make. And speaking of comments, I'll squeeze in some comments somewhere along the way. I'll find time to make some comments.
We were stuck.
I wanted to point that out for the edification of some of the people who perhaps have lost their brains somewhere along the line. This catch-22, this preposterous situation where Chris and his fellow students were told, you can leave. You can leave anytime you want. The only thing is you have to take a commercial airline. There were no commercial airlines coming into Grenada. And what gets me irritated are people in my own profession, Chris, who jump in and condemn this operation and would be the same ones to condemn the administration if indeed the situation had deteriorated to a point where you were held for ransom. Pentagon sources and radio reports from Barbados say the final strongholds of Grenadian and Cuban troops have been crushed. They say only pockets of resistance remain. Hey, this seems like old times. It's America again. Huh? Right, Chris Anselmi, medical student, evacuated, rescued from Grenada, and he returned at about 2 o'clock this morning.
I'm going to be proud of anybody. You should be proud of the guys that helped to get us out of there. The soldiers did a heck of a job, and they really extended us every consideration and courtesy in a dangerous situation. And I would just like to especially thank the 1st Ranger Battalion of the 75th Infantry and the 82nd Airborne Division. You guys were great, and I think I can speak for myself and my fellow students when I say that you have our total support and just our total thanks.
That's wonderful, Chris. How does it make you feel, even though you've been back only a short time? I'm sure you're aware of the sniping that's going on, the political criticism that's taking place, the almost regret that you guys were pulled out of there on the part of certain politicians and others. How does it make you feel?
Well, I guess it makes me feel a little upset. I think if they were there, they would have been very happy to see those soldiers come in and get us out.
Yeah, I think that's the key right there. If Senator Ted Kennedy's son were there, would he be complaining? I doubt it.
Well, I said 192 dead. Oh my God! And this guy looks at me and said it should have been 1,000.
What?
Yes, sir.
I hope you shot him on the spot.
I wish I could have. But there's a law against that too. But
not really. Not anymore. There used to be.
Well,
what has happened in this country is we have to have our heads knocked off before we fight back, before we take action. When the Israelis launch a preemptive strike on the Iraqi nuclear plant, we say bravo. We laud them. When they conduct a lightning strike into Entebbe to free hostage Israelis, we say how brilliant, how brave, how noble. And yet when our own president takes action, which is necessary, there are those of us who are either so stupid or so traitorous of heart that they condemn. What I'm driving at is simply this: even if there weren't the students on St. George University, at St. George University on that island, we should have done what we did. The Cubans weren't building that runway for the Concorde. The Cubans weren't storing all of that military equipment for the archives. The Russian advisors and the Cuban soldiers weren't there for rest and rehabilitation. And yet I'm notified by a student at John Jay who is studying law that organizations have sprung up overnight headed by teachers calling the president a warmonger and organizing rallies and coming out with the latest cliche, U.S. out of Grenada. I'll tell you this, my friends, either we're going to get them or they're going to get us. It's that simple. He wasn't Marxist enough. Now, the people who staged the coup d'etat and who assassinated Bishop and I believe others in the government at the time are even to the left of the late Maurice Bishop. This statement we're going to hear, which runs about 2 minutes, you will hear delivered by the person who, I guess, was in charge of Grenada at the time of the American invasion. Okay?
That's true.
All right. Let's listen. Here it is, as taped by our guest, Bruce Levy.
Stood that the Revolutionary Armed Forces will govern with absolute strictness. Anyone who seeks to demonstrate or disturb the peace will be shot. An all-day and all-night curfew will be established for the next 4 days, from now until next Monday at 6 o'clock. No one is to leave their house. Anyone violating this curfew will be shot on sight. All schools are closed and all workplaces except for the essential services until further notice. The personal safety and property of all citizens and foreign residents will be guaranteed by the armed forces. Let it be clearly understood that the People's Revolutionary Army is totally united. We are also clear that our major task at this moment is to protect and defend our country against any attack by imperialism. Our people must be clear that imperialism will seek to take advantage of this situation. We must also realize clearly that a military invasion would bring about the death of thousands of our people, and that any confusion in Grenada at this time opens the way for such intervention by imperialism. Whatever each man's personal views on this situation at this time, we must unite to defend our country against any attack by outside force. The armed forces, for their part, will defend the revolution with all our might. Long live the revolution, long live our people, Long live Grenada, forward ever, backward never.
As far as you're concerned, General Austin, drop dead. He arrived at 2 o'clock yesterday morning, and prior to his departure, to his escape from Grenada, he made tape recordings of Radio Grenada. They call it Radio Free Grenada, but I assure you it was anything but free. Naturally, the Soviet Union, those saints of saints, accusing the United States of firing on the Soviet embassy in Grenada and wounding one staffer. A senior State Department official says the Soviet mission was never purposely targeted.
We hadn't heard any of this news at all, but Bishop had killed the man in charge. The Prime Minister, Gary, was in New York visiting, and Bishop, who had never been able to get elected, killed...
In other words, what you're saying is, and most people don't know this, Maurice Bishop himself got his just desserts, really, because he shot his way into power.
That's right. He shot the man in charge, they shot the man in charge of the ammunition, and they shot the man in charge of the radio, took over, and there was no radio connection for...
We can't be sorry for Bishop, and nobody is. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. I know.
The paper.
Listen, you want to know, there's some traitorous bunch of no-good skunks organizing right now a demonstration. It's some so-called Caribbean coalition, and these are people who will be marching Utica Avenue, Eastern Parkway, and let me tell you, each and every one of them does not belong to be in this country. Probably most of them are here illegally anyway, and what we ought to do is round them all up, find out who is an American citizen, and those who aren't, we ought to put on a plane and drop them without parachutes on the beloved island of Grenada. Thank you, Gene.
Well, you know, half of them arms and everything came from the state of Israel. Do you know that? That's why they didn't mention the Russian arms. They came from the state of Israel.
What came from Israel?
The arms they captured. Half of them.
Well, no, I didn't know that. How did you find that out, John?
Huh?
How'd you find that out?
I'm a KBG agent.
You are KGB?
Yeah.
By the way, listen. John, would you identify yourself the next time I walk past so I can step on you and squash you?
For one, feel that most of what I'm hearing is a well-orchestrated ploy. I honestly believe that the students were not in danger. First of all, let me say that I myself, my wife and I have been in Grenada.
Let me ask you this, my friend Maurice.
Not a friend of mine.
Well, let me ask you this.
Friend.
Let me ask you this, pal.
No, I'm not pal.
Let me ask you this, you jerk. Let me ask you this. If you had a son there, would you want to take your chances?
Absolutely.
You creep, get off the phone. I got no time for you. I can tolerate just so much. You're on... Oh, that's it exactly. That's precisely the point. Better that we should argue now whether it was necessary than to let Bruce Levy and his fellow students be held in captivity and then wring our hands and say, why didn't we do something when we could have? Well, I'll tell you something. I'm so tired of the ABC Nightline putting on Moscow propagandists.
Havana propaganda.
And Havana propagandists, but this first time they've had a Havana I figured, what's the point? Why do we give a Moscow mouthpiece for the Kremlin the opportunity to spew his evil propaganda?
I totally agree with
So what did he have to say that we were going to learn anything from?
But the American...
I mean, does Ted Koppel, does he really think that that's good for ratings? I mean, I can see no other reason for it. Over and over again, they keep having these slimy jerks from Moscow. Anyway...
gentleman from the Washington Post has asked the question.
He was no gentleman. He was a Russian skunk.
I know. The question, were the Grenadian people happy about the United States coming in? Well, the soldiers fought the Americans. Yeah, but he said, well, wait a second. I asked about the people. And reluctantly, it killed him to get the words out. They were very happy. I mean, these guys are beautiful.
Yeah.
You get Tom Brokaw, who I don't know what he's doing, another lightweight.
Well, listen, don't knock Brokaw, because considering his obvious handicaps, he's done quite well.
He said before and after the speech, it'd probably be more of the same thing. So I told you it's going to be the same thing. And then Dan Rather comes on and says, you remember these pictures we're giving you? They're from the military.
That's right.
The military.
Wow. Why don't we just turn the country over to a junta headed by Sam Donaldson, Dan Rather, Helen Thomas and the rest of those sanctimonious elitist snobs. Listen, I got to go. I thank you. I object to most of all about the media is that it's obvious to me that they're strutting egomaniacal superstars first and Americans second. Instead of saying, hang it all, it's a great thing we got these youngsters out, and it's a good thing that we didn't have any undue problems. All they can think of is that they weren't there to scoop everybody else. That's all they can think of. And I think it's a shame. I think they ought to be ashamed of them, and it's too bad we don't have some alternative network so we could boycott a lot of them.
That's the secret information, military papers.
The question, of course, is just compounded. What were they doing there? As if we didn't know. No, you talk about the press, and I'm really ashamed.
I am too.
I'm really ashamed of the journalistic profession. Well, it's not their fault. I'll tell you why. Because of the nature of television, primarily, we have made stars out of people who really shouldn't be stars. The journalist, the reporter, is not supposed to be a celebrity, not supposed to be a star.
Isn't he supposed to be an objective reporter?
And the Dan Rathers and people like that being overpaid for reading these teleprompters. I mean, they sit down, the makeup man throws a little powder puff on them just a once over, a little hairspray, make sure they look good. And then, boom, they get the cue, they're on, they read the teleprompter. You know that the teleprompter even says, good evening, this is Dan Rather. He even says it. I mean, like he doesn't know his own name if he doesn't read it.
I believe you, Bob.
So they read the cotton-picking teleprompter, and people say, my, are they knowledgeable? What great celebrities would... And they begin to think they're more important than the world and the nation they're covering. Shame on all of them. By the way, let me talk to my producer, Nicole Sander. Would you call Sam Donaldson in Washington and ask if it's all right if I continue this broadcast, since he's now in charge of the country? But I think maybe we ought to play again the recording of that skunk.
Communist regime that rules mainland China.
General Austin, that butcher who murdered Maurice Bishop, who overthrew the regime there, and who was attempting to pave the way for a complete, total domination by Fidel Castro. We ought to play his shoot to kill announcement that Bruce Levy recorded.
And everybody out there is listening to it. I'd like you to think about how you would feel if you had turned on the radio one night and happened to hear a statement like this.
That the Revolutionary Armed Forces will govern with absolute strictness. Anyone who seeks to demonstrate or disturb the peace will be shot. An all-day and all-night curfew will be established for the next 4 days, from now until next Monday at 6 o'clock. No one is to leave their house. Anyone violating this curfew will be shot on sight. All schools are closed and all workplaces except for the essential services until further notice. The personal safety and property of all citizens and foreign residents will be guaranteed by the armed forces. Let it be clearly understood that the People's Revolutionary Army is totally united. We are also clear that our major task at this moment is to protect and defend our country against any attack by imperialism. Our people must be clear that imperialism will seek to take advantage of this situation. We must also realize clearly that a military invasion would bring about the death of thousands of our people, and that any confusion in Grenada at this time opens the way for such intervention by imperialism. Whatever each man's personal views on this situation at this time, we must unite to defend our country against any attack by outside force. The armed forces, for their part, will defend the revolution with all our might. Long live the revolution, long live our people, long live Grenada, forward ever, backward backward never.
And that was an elocution lesson being given by a guy known as General Hudson Austin, who was Fidel Castro's valet and used to shine his boots every morning by licking them. And he licked Castro's boots so well that Castro put him in charge of Grenada. Whatever happened to that creep we just heard, Bruce, do you know?
Happened to him.
Well, let's just hope he gets everything that's coming to him.
I'd like to know if he thinks that maybe we should storm the beaches of South Africa so that they can have the blacks their democracy and freedom.
The question is totally absurd, irrelevant, and idiotic, and meant to be provocative, but you don't get provoked over nothing.
Like, huh? Tell me, you don't agree that you was a commie, was on the left, this, that.
No, that isn't a fact, Tom. There's guys like you. You're not a commie. You're just a drunk on WMCA.
Coming back to the young lady that was murdered, I'd like to know why they had to set aside rooms that originally were cells so that the prisoners could have television and radio and private rooms. My children were not raised in private rooms. I had to double up on my kids. And in jail, they have to have that and let more criminals out on the ground murdered.
You've got the right perspective on this. You put it right where it is, right where it belongs.
Perhaps would they need tennis courts and maybe a golf course too they could have? I mean,
no, I'll tell you what it's.
Things.
Yeah, this is all the result of the last 20 years or so with this incredible liberal binge that still is with us. I mean, it's like the hangover from the Warren Court days, but you have Morris Lasker, who is more worried about how much comfort a prisoner has than he is about the safety of people out on the streets.
Well,
how can anybody come to any other conclusion? I defy anybody to show that Morris Lasker really cares. And this is not the first time Judge Lasker has come up with some cockamamie decision.
Number two, why should we pay $80,000 to $100,000 for a cell to keep these mutants in class? That's what I can't understand. Del Bello said it's so many words said it was our fault because we didn't pass that previous bondage.
Yeah.
Already an old friend of yours. I want to speak about Jesse Jackson, but he shook hands with Ramsey Clark, who then? And
did Ramsey Clark lick his left boot first or his right boot? How did he?
I don't know because I didn't tape it and I couldn't.
I see.
But what?
On the air, I think, given time in the future, a representative from New York State Insurance, where
it's possible. Who knows? The way we're chewing up guests, we're liable to get anybody and everybody by the time a year passes.
No.
Matter of fact, I see a guy washing a window across the street. Go get him. Get him. Okay.
Great show.
Thank you, sir. I agree. Thank you.
Coretta Scott King at a functioning over the weekend, and she said, verbatim, she said, Martin Luther King was a much more important and greater American hero than George Washington.
Hey, look, Bruce, take it easy. You're going to make me nervous. I'll take your word for it for the time being, and I'll look into it.
Okay.
All right?
I just wish the rest of the media would look into it, too.
Are you kidding? The rest of the media is scared stiff. Are you kidding? They all, listen, did you ever read 1984?
Oh, yeah. Orwellian,
All right. Do you remember, they go into great detail, Winston Smith, I believe was the hero's name, or guy talks about how to learn doublethink, how to practice doublethink. Well, the media are past masters at doublethink because they're doing it all the time. Thank you very much. You know, Professor Cohen's absolutely right. The media jumps on anything nuclear in the most negative way. But in addition to that, people like Jane Fonda command the media. You know that. Jane Fonda can call Dan Rather and say, I'm going to try to put my big toe in my mouth at 1 a.m. Standing on the La Brea tar pits. And Rather would run out there and cover the story in person, you know. And he'd bump into Jennings and the guy with the speech impediment, Brokaw, trying to beat him to it, you know. Would the name mean anything to you? I doubt. Because one thing is sure, the Gabons are out there, and they are growing in numbers. I wish they were growing in numbers. I wish anybody was growing in numbers. Anyway, a roll of dishonor. You know, well, they are the 7 members of Congress, and I truly am sorry that they are members of the United States Congress, who, out of 535, a total of 535 people in the United States Congress, these 7 say the president should be impeached for the rescue. Ted Weiss of Manhattan, dishonor. John Conyers of Michigan, dishonor. Julian C. Dixon, California, dishonor. Mervyn M. Dimley, California, dishonor. Henry B. Gonzalez, Texas, dishonor. Mickey Leland, Texas, dishonor. And Perrin J. Mitchell, Maryland, dishonor. They are all Democrats, all 7 are Democrats, and all 7 represent a disgrace to their party. But maybe their party won't be disgraced by these 7, and if their party is not disgraced by these 7, then the party is in worse shape than we may think. The flip-flopping of Tip O'Neill says a great deal. And I think that to focus on that flip-flopping tells us where the Democratic Party is headed. As Pat Buchanan puts it, it is tilted toward oblivion. Perhaps the best metaphor for the philosophical and policy confusion that reigns in the hierarchy of that party was the near pathetic performance this past week or 2 of the Speaker of the House himself. Informed of the president's decision to go into Grenada, Tip O'Neill first adopted the traditional bipartisan stance of patriotic and supportive Americans, and that was silence when U.S. men go into action. And then when his party on the Hill suddenly began reacting like the Berkeley Student Union to the use of American force, Tip panicked, bolted from the president's phalanx, and denounced the president's decision as frightening, an example of gunboat diplomacy. Tuesday, however, 2 weeks after the Marines and Rangers went in, another about-face, meeting with his congressional fact-finding delegation back from Grenada with the conclusion that Reagan was dead right in his concerns. Tip pronounced intervention justified. On the Hill, opposition to the president's decision is collapsing, and Democratic advisors are describing it as a strategic retreat in the face of overwhelming public approval of the president's action. Now, set aside ideology for the moment. How can a political party so fluid in principle, so unsure of its fundamental beliefs that it will put a wetted finger to the wind before passing judgment on the wisdom and rectitude of a major U.S. military operation, pretend it has a superior claim to be entrusted with the leadership of the United States? Its own early returns to power aside, what does a Democratic Party stand for anymore? Between the Truman presidency and the Johnson years, containment of the Soviet Union was the foreign policy pole star of the Democratic Party. That the Soviet Union was a malevolent force in world affairs whose global expansion had to be checked in the interest of freedom, democracy, and human rights was axiomatic. But what is going on now? Does anybody know? Well, is the Democratic Party any longer a serious institution? What it appears to be about in Central America is slashing military aid deep enough to deny victory to pro-American governments and guerrillas, while not slashing so deep as to leave the Democratic Party with exclusive blame for the collapse. In the war between Castroism and the United States, the Democratic Party has become Fidel Castro's last best hope. See, you got to remember the constituencies that these 7 represent are people who, in the majority, have the same anti-American viewpoints. Obviously, these individuals hate people who are, represent people who are either socialists, nihilists, haters, people who, for one reason or another, don't like this country and don't want to see this country assert its just prerogatives. They don't want to see us do that. They want to see us supine. They want to see us weak, divided. There's a great minority representation amongst the 7. And the question arises, why?
It's really a disgusting situation. It really is. It makes me sick to my stomach to say to myself, these guys are in Congress, they're voting on things, and how dare they come at the Democrats? That's the Latin expression.
Well, I think that, I don't like these 7 one bit. I think, as far as they have announced that they're enemies of my country, but what disturbs me even more is the fact that they probably will all be reelected because they represent areas, they represent enclaves of anti-Americanism. Election time is a year away, but if it were being held right now, I think I'd resign in order to work against Teddy Weiss. I really don't think Ted Weiss should deserve the continued honor of a seat in the United States Congress anymore.
You taking bets, Bob?
No, I don't bet.
Yeah, no, just a figure of speech.
Ever since...
he's going to be reelected?
What, the president?
No, Teddy Weiss.
Oh, Teddy Weiss. I'm afraid he would be.
I'm not afraid. I know he would.
Yeah, because, you see, I used to live in what is now, I believe, when I lived there, it was called the 19th District. I don't know what they call it now. It used to be, you should pardon the expression, Bella Abzug's old district. And I lived there, and Ted Weiss was my congressman. Of course, I'm proud to say he never got my vote.
Yeah.
But I know the district, and I'm afraid he will be reelected.
Him and Bella Abzug should go to a dance together and tango together. They'd make a perfect...
They should... Does Ted Weiss dance with women? I
don't know. Maybe, listen.
Yeah.
For all I know.
Beginning of your opening of the show today, talking about that list of representatives who are moving to impeach the president, I was wondering if you had any information about any senators. Particularly, I'm interested in our Senator Moynihan, who feels the same way.
Well, no, Pat Moynihan reversed himself. Pat Moynihan corrected himself. And the other day, he said, after assessing the facts, my first reaction was wrong, and I support the action of the president.
Oh, he went the way of O'Neill.
That's right.
Oh, see, I hadn't heard that. I heard about O'Neill's change of tune, but I didn't hear of Moynihan's. And I must admit, as a New Yorker, I didn't think he was representing me.
Well, Senator Moynihan went off half-cocked, and he admitted it. You have to give him credit for...
Yeah, I give credit for that. I did. To tell you something, when I first entered college, I thought I was going into a place of learning. Let me tell you something. It's not. There's not one professor who seems to be able to restrain himself from commenting negatively on anything this administration does. Even my Latin teacher had to put in his 2 cents the other day. And if you say anything, they talk about how their academic freedom protects them. They can say whatever they want. It just makes me...
And yet if we follow their policies, their academic freedom and every freedom will be gone, will be taken away. Here's who the 7 are. Ted Weiss has never stood up for this country before. Perrin Mitchell, he hates this country. Conyers, he hates this country. These are people who have never once, I have never heard them make any kind of statement which would indicate that they have any patriotic fervor, any feeling whatsoever for this country.
I know how they got to be congressmen.
Because the boobs that they represent voted for them for one reason or another.
We don't protect. Did you see all the ammunition that they had there, all the Cubans that were there? We routed them out like as if they were vermin.
And they were vermin.
That's right.
Without a doubt. Yes.
I want to just make my weekly call about Jesse Jackson's anti-Semitism. We get our basis on about his anti-Semitism from his statements. Now, one of his most famous statements was in that infamous meeting in 1978 where the anti-Semitism had fired Russell was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He said, he said the Klan doesn't trade with South Africa. The Klan didn't press the Baki case. The Klan didn't press Randall Young, leaving you to say, who did it? The Jews. And and they stood up and cheered lustily. Now, Percy Sutton followed him and said, after all I did for the Jews, this is what they do to me now. They get Andrew Young out of a job. And also, Jesse Jackson's campaign manager in New York is Albert Vance, who led the anti-Semitic tirade against the Jewish teachers, whoever teachers were Jewish in 1968, and says in New York Magazine, in my judgment, I have never been an anti-Semite. Jesse Jackson says, I'm not an anti-Semite. All he does, we have records of him saying, the international Jewish bankers.
Paul Neil-Nose Menadja, who is out on a work release program from Allenwood, Pennsylvania, where I understand Mr. Menadja was given the Jimmy Hoffa suite while he did his time. A gentleman by the name of Roger Connor, who is the executive director of FAIR, that's the Federation for American Immigration Reform.
The reason nothing has been done is that the politicians in Washington are trying to prove the old adage that Washington is 25 square miles surrounded by reality. They're playing political games with this country's future. Tip O'Neill had a bill that had passed the Senate. It passed the House committee. It was ready to go to the House floor. It's called the Simpson-Mazzoli bill. It would, if it had been allowed to be voted on, this bill would have clearly passed the House. I think it would have passed with over 300 votes. Tip O'Neill was visited by the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who said to him that Hispanic Americans were opposed to immigration reform, and that in order for the Democrats to win favor with these Hispanic voters, he should kill the bill by not allowing it to be voted on. And he did. So what he said was he would not allow the bill to be voted on. And
this country is to heck with Americans and with America. Let's worry about each little pressure group whose heart is not in this country. Because if a Hispanic American is concerned with the future of this country, they should be as concerned about this problem as you or I.
And here's the most interesting part. We funded an opinion poll. We polled Hispanic American citizens, and do you know what they found? Hispanic American citizens support immigration control. The only Hispanics we could find in the country opposed to immigration control were the non-citizens. And yet and that's who Tip O'Neill responded to. It is just, it's a startling turn of events.
In other words, non-American citizens are having an impact on American policy more than American citizens are.
That's exactly right.
Now, do they have any idea for everyone they catch how many are making it successfully?
The experts in the Border Patrol say at least 3 or 4 get in for every one they catch.
If that's true, then at least 3 million people slipped into this country, invaded it in the dark of night last year.
Nobody knows the exact numbers because some of those 1 million apprehensions were someone they caught twice. Okay? But the Border Patrol estimates that there were at least 2 million who entered illegally, violating our immigration laws. You could even say flouting them in the last 12 months. I think they ought to write a letter to Tip O'Neill, to the U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C.
Okay, wait, I'm going to start my letter. Dear Pac-Man.
That's right. The people ought to just give him a real simple message. I protest. And the other thing I think people ought to say is that the Democratic Party, if this continues, that the Democratic candidates will be held responsible in 1984. That may be the one thing he can understand.
Russell.
I really haven't caught your show in recent weeks, but I just wanted to say that I'm very, very disturbed by Reagan's foreign policy around the world. I think this man has surrounded himself with madmen of the right.
All right, instead of just using name-calling phrases, What is the policy that you don't like?
Well, I think we're trying to build a wall around this country against communism, and our house is falling apart.
Well, where don't you like what we've done?
Well, when we went into Grenada, it was just naked aggression. Total
naked aggression.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bob.
With the Soviet Union putting in 10,000, the equipment to arm 10,000 troops, with the airfield that the Soviet Union had built there, with the fact that American students were in danger, you call that naked aggression. Russell, I think I can tell by the way you talk, not so much what you say, really, but the way you say it, that you don't really believe what you're saying. You're just trying to be provocative. And it's a good thing nobody knows where you are, because if they did, they'd come over and take you away and put you in the pilgrim state where you belong. Because you're nuts. Somebody just right to Tip O'Neill.
And it was...
Because he kept the Mazzoli-Simpson bill locked in the committee. He would not let it come out of committee. He knew that had it come out of committee, it would have passed the House, it had passed the Senate, and the President would have signed it. We would have had a reform bill in effect.
I think, and it's
something. They had a little rally down in Washington that I would have loved. I would have loved to have had about 10,000 pellets of cyanide and just dropped down there. Yeah, I tell you, if I could have done that, I would have rid this country of some of the most obnoxious, dangerous bills we've got. It was just incredible.
It's pathetic. It really is pathetic that these people...
dissension is one thing. Dissension is one thing, but total enmity is something else. David Broder, in his syndicated column, and David Broder is with the Washington Post, and Mr. Broder, a liberal columnist, he says in yesterday's column, syndicated throughout the country, that the stage is set for a Reagan re-election landslide.
To your elders, I was born in northern Poland, was occupied by Russia. And I went to school there, and to Russian schools, and, I'm just flabbergasted the naiveness of the American people toward Russia. I would say, I can say that they're ignorant, most of them. When I was in school, I was a pioneer. And we never learned. American people never learned this. American people are so naive in believing everything Russia will do.
Well, there are some young people, and he was young. There are some young people who were raised with the belief that anything that this country does is wrong. No matter what it is, it's wrong.
I know what you're saying. After all, after being liberated from a concentration camp, I was a very liberal man. Then I came to this country after the war. I was very liberal, after all, going through concentration camps and being discriminated. After a while, I was so disenchanted with liberalism, and I see where it got us. And I see I was always a Democrat. But hooray for Mr. Reagan. He's the only president since I am in this country that has some guts, after Truman.
Well, in view of the fact that we have a very strange way we run things in this country. I'd like to know, I'm going to have to reread the Constitution. I don't think I read it every night. I don't want to mislead you and think that I do. I don't claim to be a constitutional expert. I'm not. But I don't lose something about it. And nowhere in the Constitution does it says that Morris Lasker is supposed to run the whole damn thing. We've got an executive branch, we've got a legislative branch, we've got a judicial branch. Each and every one of these branches is supposed to perform a specific function. Each one of these branches, although there may be some certain perceived overlapping, has definite obligations, responsibilities, and purviews. But in the last 25 or so years, the judiciary has become swollen with power, arrogant, and totally misguided. There are murderers walking the streets all over this nation, not just here in New York. Because the problem, I started to say crime, and the Freudian slip, of course, is not altogether without meaning. The problem is these are federal judges. Morris Lasker is a federal judge. On what does he base turning loose brutal enemies of society? If the circus came to town and Morris Lasker went down to Madison Square Garden, and as the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey trucks were unloading, he opened cages and let lions and tigers loose, we'd figure that Morris Lasker had a few screws loose. And yet Morris Lasker lets out hundreds of fiends, every bit as vicious as lions and tigers, every bit as dangerous, matter of fact, even more so. At least a lion or a tiger, if he's well fed, he's just going to lie there and growl a little bit maybe and sleep a little bit. And he's not going to go looking for it. But Morris Lasker, if he has a conscience, has got to feel mighty rotten right now. What do you...
Brad, this is the Goombata.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's everybody stand. Even those of you who are driving in your automobiles, pull over to the side of the road. I want you to stand while we hear the voice of Goombata. Have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy Aubignou.
Listen, quick comments on a little, 2 or 3 lines in the Daily News editorial yesterday on Rikers Island.
Yeah.
They claim there are 672 cells sitting empty. Lasker refuses to let them be filled, and the reason is they're on a 3rd tier of their cell block, and he worries about their safety. A prisoner might fall and get hurt.
Wouldn't that be just too bad?
Isn't that fantastic?
Well, as I said 2 weeks ago, Morris Lasker is more concerned with the scum criminal, the antisocial miscreant, the marauder, than he is with you and all your neighbors.
Unfortunately, that's very, very true, Bob, and things can get worse, and it looks like this is one of these Murphy Law things here.
Well, I've had Morris Lasker's number for years, so, you know, this doesn't surprise me. What does horrify me, though, is the fact that he has apparently such power, and no one really challenges it. Even the mayor couldn't do anything about it. We've talked mainly about the incredible spectacle of all these marauders, all these thugs, all these enemies of society, these violent antisocial people roaming the streets because a guy by the name of Morris Lasker is more concerned with their comfort than with your safety.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello, Bobby. Listen, I want to thank you from you for Judge Lasker, you know, for letting me out, you know, because I come from Miami, you know. And he let me out, and I want to thank him, you know, for letting me out. But listen, don't talk about...
Well, who are you supposed to be, you creep?
Listen, don't talk like that, you know what I mean?
I mean, what kind of accent is that supposed to be?
Listen, don't talk like that.
Why don't you go... Listen, why don't you go to the Lee Strasberg Acting School?
Listen, I got 2 chapters, you know what I mean? Don't talk like that.
No, I won't talk like that. I'm Bob Von Nobly. All right, I'm WMCA. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I like you both talk like that always.
What do we go from bad to worse?
Huh?
What do we do? Go from bad to worse? What is it? What is it? Feeding time at Pilgrim State?
No, I'm talking from. I'm Michael from Moscow.
Michael from Moscow.
Sir.
Hey, listen, pal, do me a favor. At 3 o'clock this morning, when you call Ray Bream, thank you.
Worried about ratings.
Well, they're worried about rating. They're worried about advertisers. The last thing in the world, I can assure you, that any television executive is worried about is the security of this country. I firmly believe, now somebody might label me a complete ass, but I firmly believe, I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it, that for whatever reason, the security of the United States of America is the last thing they have on their mind.
Listen to me. They had a closed audience
private audience, for this movie. And they invited all the parliament. Now, who showed up was just some of the members of the Greens Party.
Of course. It's been blown all out of proportion. I'm not saying that Stoddard and the rest of the airheads responsible sat down and said, hey, listen, let's scuttle the positioning of the Pershing IIs and the cruise missiles by showing on November 21st this program that could devastate the Western world. I really don't believe that for 1 minute.
President Carter was in, and they were going to deploy the neutron bomb, and all the hysteria that went on, and he waffled, and he...
Well, being a not even a tower of jelly, but being a vessel of jelly, of course he caved in.
But Pest, that they're putting...
And that's why after 4 years the people said enough already.
Right.